The Prime Minister has weighed in on the controversy surrounding Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc and his close ties to a number of judicial appointees in his home province of New Brunswick. The CBC's Evan Dyer is here with the latest details. So, Evan, bring us up to speed on the controversy and what the Prime Minister had to say.
Well, Katie, this has to do with 6 judges who were appointed in New Brunswick, where, of course, Dominic LeBlanc is the government's leading member. He recused himself from one of these appointments, and that was a judge who is a family member by marriage related to him. But he did not recuse himself from the other 5. We don't know how deeply he was involved in those talks. But what we do know is that 4 of those other 5 do also have connections to Dominic LeBlanc. They're not connections of blood or marriage, but in 3 cases, they're political donations that helped him to pay off a campaign debt that was left over from his leadership run. And in the 4th case, we're actually talking about a Conservative, so that would appear not to be a problem, but she's married to a Liberal who was also a LeBlanc donor, also contributed to help pay off that campaign debt. And in addition, in her case, that couple also bought some kind of a beachfront property for close to $500,000 from Dominic LeBlanc about 6 years ago. So people are raising questions about this. It's a reminder this has happened before in Atlantic Canada. We saw a similar case with Peter MacKay, where 6 out of 9 appointees in Nova Scotia had connections to him. One was his former best man, one was his best man's wife, and a number of other people who've been prominent in the Conservative Party. Today, though, Justin Trudeau came out and he said that they're confident with the new system that they've instituted. They say that they believe that it is independent and that they have no plans to change it. Let's watch it.
We have a merit-based, transparent appointment system. It was a significant improvement over the process that Stephen Harper and the Conservatives had in place that was not transparent, not merit-based. We are pleased that we have nominated top-notch judges right across the country, and we will continue to.
So in the case of New Brunswick, for example, there is now a committee that has 7 members. 3 are appointed by the federal government, and others get to weigh in as well. For example, the Law Society of the province appoints one, the Canadian Bar Association another, and then they put forward a list of recommended justices. But it is, at the end of the day, of course, the government that gets to pick from that list. And somehow we are still seeing, apparently, a lot of partisanship, because the Globe and Mail did a study of the judges that have been appointed, and by an order of magnitude, they're more likely to have donated to the Liberal Party than to the Conservative Party. Something like 90% of those who've donated to political parties donated to the Liberal Party, only about 11% to the Conservative Party.
Now, you hinted at this in your sort of, we were just chatting a second ago, but how does this compare to how other governments have handled appointments, and how could the system be changed?
Well, and you're always going to have the problem in a smaller province like New Brunswick and Nova Scotia that everybody in the legal profession more or less knows each other, right? And you're looking at a fairly small pool of people who could become judges. But there are ways, nonetheless, to fix this by getting politicians out of the decision-making process altogether, for example, or having those independent committees come back with shorter lists. Duff Conacher, who's making a complaint about this case, is the head of an advocacy group, Democracy Watch, and he's talked about how things might be fixed and what are the deficiencies right now with the committee system that we have when we compare it to other jurisdictions. Let's listen to him.
The way to do it is have a committee where all the political parties have to agree on the people on that committee, because the NDP wouldn't allow Liberals to be on the committee and vice versa, and same with the other parties. And that would resolve the conflicts and end up with a committee that's made up of people who are truly independent from all the parties. And that would take the taint out of the system.
And that's one way you could do it, to make sure the people on the committee have no party connections. He says many of the candidates, including these ones in New Brunswick, may very well be qualified people, and they are themselves, in a way, victims of this system because it puts a taint on them. But another thing he says is also they should not be giving the parties a long list of potential candidates that then they can compare to their donor lists and pick the ones who are best aligned with their party. It's got to be a short list, even one name. That would solve this problem.
Evan Dyer, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Katie.
All right, let's get some reaction now from the Power Panel, Melissa Lantsman, Andrew Thompson, and David Ertel. So the Prime Minister was asked today, as we just heard from Evan, about these appointments at the judicial level in New Brunswick with people who have ties to Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Let's start with Andrew. Is the Prime Minister's answer, sufficient to sort of dispel any sort of whiff of something being wrong here?
Well, this still looks like the worst kind of pork barreling, and it's hard to tell whether it's actually designed that way or if this is a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of approach within the parties. It does all just not look like it's meeting the objective of moving towards a less partisan bench. The approach that the Prime Minister describes, though, can work. I mean, it's the approach we brought in Saskatchewan 20 years ago. And if you look at the appointments that were happening at the provincial court level there, even in this last month, we've seen a number of Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations members elevated to the bench. We've seen people of various political stripes elevated to the bench without the kind of sense that this was a directly handpicking by some kind of a political process. Lawyers are often quite politically active. I don't think that we should begrudge them that while they are lawyers. And there's nothing that shows that once they become judges that they maintain a kind of partisan mentality. But the public, I think, is looking at this and saying, why is this not working better? So figuring out how to strengthen those kind of independent bodies that provide the nominations, moving the cabinet out of this accepted and really kind of a rubber stamping kind of way, I think is an important next step to take, and that's what we'll need to see to make sure that this is a much more effective process than what we're seeing today.
Melissa, do you think that the Prime Minister's comments have done enough to sort of ease any concerns that have emerged since this story broke earlier this week?
No, certainly not. And I think Andrew's right in terms of the provincial appointment system. You also have public members, so the members that aren't part of the profession, and that's resulted in a much more sort of diverse bench across provinces. I think the Prime Minister fell short on his answer because he told you that he changed the process, and yet we have the exact same result as the government before him. So it's not really a question of process, it's a question of good old school patronage, and it's not really about what you know, it's about who you know. And he told you he was going to do things differently, and I think that's the major problem because you're seeing that he's not.
But David, do you think that there is another factor here? We have seen this issue come up in the past. As Evan mentioned, Peter MacKay and some appointments during his time, there were a lot of connections there. Is this not simply, this province is smaller than some large cities in Canada? If you're a member of the legal community, do you not know everybody?
Well, you kind of do, but at the same time, it's no excuse. When you're talking about justice, when you're talking about our institutions, it's not only seeing that justice is done, but also the appearance that justice is done. And so right now, what you're seeing, we're 3.5 months away from the election, and this does not look good. The optics of it do not look good. You don't want to go into an election campaign talking about how you're appointing judges. I mean, I remember back here in Quebec, we had the same thing going on with the Charest government a few years ago. There had to be a public inquiry with former Supreme Court Justice Bastarache presiding, and we had to take completely the political element out of nominating judges. And I think that's the best thing. And again, this is going to fuel the on the Conservative side, the idea of making this election about Justin Trudeau's leadership. And also, when you're looking at a tight election, the way it seems to be, you're seeing the Liberals swept the Atlantic provinces in 2015. Now, you're going to have a lot of tight races. You had a lot of provincial governments changing also since then. So any little thing, and I'm not saying by all means that this is a little thing, but any item that generates more on the side of calling into question Justin Trudeau's leadership and his abilities to lead, that's going to be a negative going into the election.
Yeah, I certainly think David's...
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think David's right about this. So this is the bigger challenge that the Prime Minister is going to have, is looking like he's actually in control of the government. All these connections back to Minister LeBlanc make it look like he's really running a fiefdom out there. And that's a dangerous thing because it then sends a signal that the Prime Minister is not in control. It's a bit of the same story that runs under the surface about what happened with the Huawei executive getting arrested. Again, the Prime Minister kind of knew about it but didn't really know what to do about it. And we have a number of these circumstances that are popping up that the Prime Minister's not been able to really demonstrate that he's in full command of his government. That there are actors out there who are, doing what they think is best, but it doesn't seem to be coordinated by him. And I think that is a major issue that opposition parties will call into this campaign. Now, the flip side of that is replacing him with whom? Because the other leaders are not exactly in a position that they are obviously ready to step into the Prime Minister's job either.
I think what's a bigger problem for the Prime Minister, on top of certainly what Andrew and David have said, is that he told you that he wasn't going to do these kinds of things. He told you that it was going to be a different kind of government, and he told you that that this was going to be a new era of the way that we do politics. And what it seems like is not so. He's doing things exactly the same way as every government before him, just frankly, weaker.
David, last question to you. Is there anything that the Prime Minister can do in the short term to try and quell this criticism? Or is this something that they hope goes away and hope that the opposition parties don't try to make a lot of hay out of it, which they already are? So is there anything that Justin Trudeau can do to neutralize any of that? Or is this on there?
I think the only thing he can do is make sure Kawhi Leonard signs with the Raptors.
Today could be the 4th of Kawhi.
Yeah, Kawhi watch. I mean, and we're going to have to do a power panel on the political upside or downside of Kawhi signing or not. Will it be a good thing for the Liberals if he signs, or a good thing for the Conservatives if he doesn't? But otherwise, honestly, I think it's another drop in the bucket. I think people are taking in all these different things. And even though in the summer, I understand the campaign is not in full swing, but all these little things come in and try to strengthen a narrative about Justin Trudeau.
And we're going to have to leave it right there. I wanted to say thank you to the Power Panel, Melissa Lantsman, Andrew Thompson, and David Ertel.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.